Hey everyone. Tonight we begin in a quiet little town where nothing should have happened. Gettysburg, a place with just 2,400 people, dotted with farms, crisscrossed by dusty roads. But in 3 days, it became the largest graveyard in America. 50,000 men lay dead or dying in the fields, the streets, even inside family homes. Children covered their faces from the stench. Women found their kitchens turned into hospitals, and fathers buried strangers in their gardens. This wasn't a battlefield far away. It was a neighborhood turned into hell. And when the gun smoke cleared, the town itself was scarred forever. So before you get comfortable, like and subscribe, and tell me what time it is where you are. You're in Gettysburg, 1863. The good news is, the town is quiet. The bad news is, that silence is about to be broken by the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. You stand at the edge of town, the dust of late June settling around your worn shoes. The air, usually thick with the scent of blossoming clover and freshly tilled earth, now carries something else, a low hum, a distant, rhythmic thrumming that makes the ground beneath your feet tremble ever so slightly. It's not a sound you recognize, yet it feels ancient, primordial, like the heartbeat of a hidden, vast creature stirring in the hazy distance. This is the silence before the storm, a quiet that holds the weight of anticipation, a hushed pause that feels profoundly unnatural. Suddenly, figures emerge from the horizon, a slow, steady stream of men, their uniforms a muted gray against the green landscape. They walk with a profound weariness, their steps dragging through the dust, their faces etched with the fatigue of hundreds of miles. As they draw closer, you notice a shocking detail, one that tugs at something deep within you. Many are barefoot. Their feet, calloused and torn, leave faint, crimson imprints in the fine, dry earth, not from fresh wounds, but from the dried, darkened blood of old ones. For many of these weary soldiers, the very ground they walk on is a torment. Each step a testament to untold pain. A whisper moves through the ranks, a fragile hope that gives strength to their faltering steps. Gettysburg, shoes. You hear the word, repeated like a prayer. A shoe warehouse, a simple, mundane thing. Yet to these men, it represents salvation, relief from the constant agony that gnaws at their very being. But you know, with a chilling certainty, that the promise is a cruel illusion. Even the shoes they do find, those cast off or taken from the fallen, will often be stiff with the dark, crusty memory of someone else's blood. They'll chafe and cut, turning a simple covering into a slow, insidious killer, causing festering sores and infections that whisper of a fate far worse than a bullet. The very thing meant to offer comfort, to carry them forward, becomes another source of their suffering. The townspeople, your neighbors, gather in hushed groups, their faces a mixture of curiosity and growing dread. You see their eyes follow the procession of soldiers, then drift to the fields just beyond the town's edge. There, the peaceful morning light, which usually illuminates grazing cattle and lazy sheep, now gleams on the wet, dark sheen of freshly spilled blood. The soldiers, hungry and desperate, have begun to slaughter the livestock, turning these familiar fields into something unrecognizable. The bleating of the animals, usually a gentle background sound, becomes a desperate cry, quickly silenced. The sight is jarring a stream, normally clear and cool, now runs with a faint, pinkish tinge, carrying the lifeblood of the land away. This tranquil, everyday scene has been transformed, in the blink of an eye, into a raw, brutal slaughterhouse, a prelude to the greater violence yet to come. The rhythmic pounding of those distant Confederate drums grows louder, a slow, relentless beat that seems to synchronize with your own tightening heart, echoing the impending storm. The quiet shatters abruptly on July 1st. It begins as a distant rumble, a low growl that steadily intensifies, then explodes into the deafening crackle of musket fire. You are suddenly immersed in a chaos that defies comprehension. Union soldiers, their faces grim and strained, are retreating through the very streets you walk every day. They run, not in an orderly fashion, but in a desperate, broken stream, their bodies a blur of blue. As they pass, they leave behind an indelible stain, trails of blood, dark and stark against the cobblestones and dusty roads, a grim, winding path that marks their retreat. You watch, frozen, as the familiar landscape of your town becomes a canvas for human suffering. Each crimson smear a testament to a life in peril, a wound freshly inflicted. The instinct to survive, to protect, is immediate and overwhelming. You find yourself, along with your family and neighbors, scrambling for the only sanctuary left, the cool, dark embrace of your cellar. The stone walls feel thin, desperately inadequate, as if they might crumble at any moment under the sheer force of the unfolding nightmare above. But still, you descend, huddling together, listening. Every sound is magnified, distorted. The sharp, piercing whistle of bullets is constant, a terrifying symphony of death. You hear them strike, not distant trees, but the very walls of your home. A sharp, sickening thud as a bullet burrows into thin wooden planks. A brittle crash as it shatters a ceramic tile. A hollow splintering that echoes through your confined space. Your house, once a fortress of peace, is now a drum, reverberating with the terrifying rhythm of the battle outside. You press closer to your loved ones, your hands instinctively reaching out for comfort, for connection. Through the small-town grimy cellar window, or perhaps from the crack beneath a jammed door, you catch fleeting glimpses of the horror. You see Union troops, desperate for any cover, taking shelter behind the very fences that mark the boundaries of your garden, the line between your peaceful existence and the encroaching hell. Confederate rifles, unseen but acutely felt, spit fire and death straight at your home. Your house, your sanctuary, becomes a shield, its thin walls absorbing the impact of the battle. Its familiar facade now a blood-stained barrier between life and obliteration. Each impact is a visceral shock, a reminder that the war is no longer a distant news report, but an intimate, terrifying reality, directly assaulting your private world. Days earlier, with a sense of unease that now feels like a profound premonition, you meticulously buried precious stores of food in your basement, jars of preserved fruits, sacks of grain, dried meats. These were provisions meant to sustain your family through the coming winter. A quiet act of foresight. But as the battle rages, the basement, your private storage, the cool, quiet place of sustenance, transforms into something else entirely. You see the wounded, brought in by desperate, harried soldiers, laid out on makeshift beds, on straw, on the bare earthen floor. Your private space becomes an emergency ward, a makeshift infirmary where life and death hang precariously in the balance. The air fills with the smells of blood and sweat and fear. The jars of food, once symbols of life, now stand amidst the raw, brutal reality of suffering. The very floor where they rest becoming soaked with the dark, sticky evidence of human pain. Your sanctuary, your home, has been utterly consumed by the war, leaving no part of your private world untouched by its devastating touch. As the first day of fighting ebbs into a night filled with the soft, persistent groans of the wounded, you venture cautiously from your cellar, or perhaps gaze through a window, and the true scale of the horror begins to unfurl. The western fields, which only yesterday stretched out in a gentle, rolling expanse of green and gold, are now irrevocably transformed. They are no longer fields. They are landscapes of the dead. Bodies lie everywhere, in disarray, piled upon each other like felled logs after a harsh winter storm. The sheer number is incomprehensible, a stark, brutal testament to the fury of the battle that has just swept through. The soft contours of the earth are now obscured by the silent, motionless forms of men. Children, your own or those of your neighbors, their faces pale and wide-eyed with a shock that will etch itself into their tender minds forever. Peer outside. They look, not at the familiar world of their childhood, but at a horrifying tapestry woven from death. The field stretches before them, not as grass or soil, but as an endless, somber carpet of uniforms. The faded gray of the Confederates, the deep blue of the Union soldiers. Their innocence is shattered, replaced by an image that will haunt their quiet moments for years to come, a world entirely consumed by the silent, still forms of men. The quiet stillness that descends upon these fields is broken only by the whispers of the wind and the agonizing, shallow sounds of those left behind. Many of the wounded, those who still cling to life, are beyond the power of a scream. Their voices, raw and torn, can only manage a rasp, a shallow, ragged intake of breath, a labored sigh, a guttural sound that escapes with profound effort. It's an eerie, chilling chorus, this death choir of the dying. It's not the dramatic cries of pain you might imagine, but a far more intimate, haunting sound. The struggle of life against its inevitable end, repeated countless times across the vast expanse of the darkened fields. Each rasp, each shallow gasp, is a tiny thread in this grim tapestry of sound, weaving together into a lullaby of despair that seems to echo from every shadow. The air, heavy and still, carries these sounds, pressing them into your very being, a constant, unsettling reminder of the profound suffering that blankets the land. In the desperate chaos of battle, some soldiers, gravely wounded but still clinging to a sliver of consciousness, would crawl. They would pull themselves with unimaginable effort towards the nearest shelter, the nearest semblance of peace, often a barn, a place of warmth, of hay, of the familiar, comforting smell of livestock. They would drag their broken bodies inside, seeking a quiet corner, a place to hide from the incessant fire, a place to perhaps find a moment of solace before the end. And there, in the soft straw, amidst the lingering scent of animals, they would die. Later, as the battle moved on, or as the first hesitant rays of dawn illuminated the aftermath, families would return to their barns, expecting to find their precious livestock, their cows, their horses, their sheep. But instead, they would find something else. Something unspeakably horrific: human corpses. The familiar and comforting space, meant for the sustenance of their livelihood, was now a tomb. A silent, macabre discovery that transformed the most ordinary of farm buildings into a final resting place for strangers. Another stark reminder of the war's brutal intrusion into every corner of their lives. You approach Seminary Hill, a place that once held a quiet reverence, crowned by its stately church. The air here, usually scented with the clean, crisp smell of old wood and the subtle, earthy aroma of prayer, is now thick and cloying. A metallic tang, a profound sweetness of blood, clings to everything, mingling with the sharper, more acrid scent of antiseptic and something indefinably raw. This place, consecrated to peace and contemplation, has been utterly transformed. Union troops, desperate to save lives, have commandeered the church, converting its hallowed halls into a sprawling, makeshift surgical ward. Inside, the light that filters through the stained glass windows, once casting colorful patterns across the pews, now illuminates a scene of horrifying efficiency. The rhythmic sound that fills the space is unlike any you've ever heard within these walls. It's the steady, unwavering cadence of saws, cutting through bone, a chilling, mechanical tempo that never falters. It speaks of agony, yes, but also of a terrible, desperate precision. Each stroke, each scrape, is a grim note in this macabre orchestra, a relentless beat that signifies another limb lost, another life altered forever. The soft sounds of prayers are replaced by the rasping of steel against flesh, a sound that promises salvation only through profound, agonizing sacrifice. As you stand, witnessing this transformation, you notice the windows, usually kept pristine and shining, are now dark with a grimmer purpose. Through them, with a sickening regularity, shapes are tossed out into the churchyard. They land with a soft thud, one after another, joining a growing heap. These are not discarded belongings or debris from the battle. They are severed limbs, arms, legs, still recognizable, still bearing the faint marks of uniform cloth, the pale, lifeless skin. The sheer volume of this grim harvest is overwhelming. A mound of human remains, growing steadily outside the house of God, a testament to the brutal choices being made within. Children, drawn by an innocent curiosity that defies the horror, sometimes wander near these piles, their small hands reaching out, their young minds struggling to comprehend the shapes they see. You might hear the sharp, distressed cry of a mother or father, pulling them away quickly, urgently, shielding their eyes from a sight that no child should ever witness. It's a desperate attempt to preserve a flicker of their innocence, even as the world around them descends into unimaginable darkness. The contrast is stark, heartbreaking, the purity of childhood curiosity against the stark, brutal reality of human dismemberment. And then there is the floor. The beautiful, polished wooden floor of the church, meticulously cared for through generations, is now stained. Not just a faint splash, but deeply, irrevocably saturated with dark, drying blood. It has seeped into the very grain of the wood, forming dark, indelible patterns that trace the paths of pain and sacrifice. Even after the soldiers have left, after the last cries have faded, the scent remains, a profound, persistent stench of blood and decay, mingled with the faint, sweet smell of human despair. It clings to the air, permeates the walls, settles into the very fabric of the building. For years, long after the war's echoes have faded, that smell will linger, a silent, invisible monument to the suffering endured within those consecrated walls, a ghost of memory that refuses to depart. You close your eyes, and you can still taste it, a bitter and iron tang that defines Seminary Hill forever. The morning of July 3rd dawns with a deceptive calm, a soft hush that seems to hold its breath. But by midday, that stillness shatters with a force that truly feels like the unleashing of hell itself. You are there, or perhaps you imagine yourself perched on a high point, looking out over the vast, open fields that separate the two armies. The air is heavy, humid, pregnant with an unspoken dread. And then, a sight that will be seared into memory: 12,500 Confederate soldiers, a massive, living wave, begin to move. They step out from the tree line, across the gentle rise, and into the exposed, unforgiving expanse of open ground. Their objective is clear, and seemingly impossible to cross those hundreds of yards of exposed land under the full, unyielding fury of Union fire. As they march, with an unwavering, terrifying resolve, the air around them begins to thicken, not with dust, but with something far more lethal. A storm of Union fire erupts. Artillery shells shriek through the air, their descent marked by a terrifying whistle, followed by deafening explosions that tear through the ranks of advancing men. Musket balls, countless thousands of them, hum and whine, a buzzing swarm of death. The grass, already dry from the summer heat, catches fire from the searing heat of the explosions and the constant rain of hot lead. Small tongues of flame lick at the earth, spreading rapidly, merging into an inferno that adds a new, horrifying layer to the battlefield. The smell of burning grass, acrid and sharp, mixes with the metallic tang of blood and gunpowder, a scent that becomes the very breath of this hellish landscape. The smoke becomes a living entity, thick and suffocating, rolling across the field in dense, impenetrable waves. It's no longer possible to distinguish individual figures clearly. You see only shapes, dissolving into a reddish mist, not from the smoke itself, but from the pulverized earth, the blood, the sheer, violent pulverization of human flesh. Men simply vanish, swallowed by the maelstrom, their forms disintegrating into the swirling, crimson haze. It's a scene of nightmarish unreality, where human beings become ephemeral, fleeting shadows against a backdrop of fire and chaos. The sounds are relentless, the roar of cannon, the continuous crackle of rifle fire, the shouts, the screams, all muffled and distorted by the oppressive blanket of smoke. Within the span of a single hour, an impossibly short 60 minutes, the open field transforms completely. What was once a vibrant landscape, alive with the desperate hope of advancing men, becomes a silent, vast sea of corpses. The green of the grass, the brown of the earth, are entirely obscured, replaced by the somber blues and grays of uniforms. The pale, still faces of the dead. It's a tableau of complete annihilation. One witness, a man who survived the ordeal, would later recount a memory so chilling, so profoundly disturbing, that it speaks volumes about the density of death. he said, in a voice hollowed by the trauma. That you could walk for hundreds of yards without touching the ground. Your feet, he explained, would rest only on bodies. Imagine it a solid carpet of fallen men, stretching as far as the eye could see, a bridge of the dead, a testament to the unquantifiable human cost of that single, desperate charge. The silence that follows the roar of battle is perhaps the most terrifying sound of all. The battle, relentless and pervasive, did not merely rage on distant fields. It crashed directly into your town, into your home, transforming every familiar space into a front line of human suffering. You discover that your house, your quiet sanctuary, has been irrevocably conscripted into the war effort. The comfortable beds, where your family slept just nights before, are now operating tables. The soft mattresses, once inviting and warm, bear the grim indentations of wounded bodies. The crisp white tablecloths, once laid out for family meals, are torn into desperate bandages, quickly soaking crimson. Every object, every piece of furniture, has been repurposed, stripped of its original meaning, forced to serve the brutal, immediate needs of the dying. The gentle scent of lavender and polished wood is replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of blood, the faint, sweet smell of ether, and the deep, raw scent of fear and pain. As cannonballs, fiery and screaming, whistle through the air and land with terrifying thuds on your roof, or the roofs of your neighbors, a profound, chilling dread takes hold. These are not merely objects. They are ticking bombs, capable of exploding and bringing down your entire world in a flash of fire and destruction. It is the women of Gettysburg, your mothers, sisters, and wives, who display an incredible, quiet courage. With a calm born of desperation, they climb onto the treacherous, sloping rooftops. They move with an unnatural swiftness, their figures silhouetted against the smoky sky, their bare hands working to retrieve these sizzling, deadly projectiles before they can ignite and destroy everything. Their bravery is not born of a grand patriotic fervor, but of a simple, fierce desire to protect what little remains: their homes, their children, their very lives. The heat from the metal sears their skin, the risk of explosion ever present. Yet they persist, driven by an instinct far older and deeper than any soldier's training. Then there is the story, whispered in hushed, horrified tones, of Jenny Wade. You knew Jenny. Perhaps she lived just down the street, or you saw her at the market, her hands dusted with flour from her daily baking. On July 3rd, amidst the unimaginable chaos, Jenny was in her kitchen, performing the most mundane, comforting of tasks kneading dough. The rhythmic push and pull of her hands, the familiar scent of rising bread. A small anchor of normalcy in a world gone mad. But a stray bullet, a random, cruel trajectory, found its mark. Jenny fell, still grasping the dough, her life extinguished in the sanctuary of her own kitchen. Her death serves as a stark, brutal reminder, a chilling truth that pierces through any illusion of safety. No one, absolutely no one, was safe. Not on the battlefield, not in the streets, and certainly not even in the quiet, supposedly impregnable refuge of your own home. The war had invaded every corner, claimed every life, without distinction or mercy. And so, a new form of vigilance settles upon the town. Every knock at the door, every shadow that passes by the window, becomes a source of profound dread. Families live with the constant, sickening knowledge that simply opening their door might mean finding a soldier, his uniform bloodied, his eyes wide with a final, desperate plea, dying on their very threshold. The boundary between the living and the dead, between the sanctity of your home and the brutal reality of the battlefield, dissolves completely. Your doorway, once a symbol of welcome and security, becomes a liminal space, a silent witness to countless final breaths, a stark and intimate reminder that death could arrive at any moment, uninvited, into the heart of your personal world. The quiet creak of a closing door now holds the weight of 1,000 untold tragedies. The true horror, perhaps, lay not just in the thunder of cannon fire, but in the grim, desperate quiet of the makeshift field hospitals. You hear the stories, or perhaps you witness the scenes yourself, within homes, barns, or even the church. Here, the very notion of medical care is redefined by scarcity and desperation. Kitchen knives, pulled from familiar drawers and once used for carving Sunday roasts, are now surgical instruments, their blades dulled by the shearing of flesh and bone. Carpenter's saws, meant for shaping wood and building homes, become tools of amputation, their jagged teeth now tearing through living tissue. The implements of ordinary life are twisted into instruments of unimaginable suffering. A stark illustration of how completely the war has consumed every aspect of existence. And there is no escape from the agony. The concept of anesthesia, of merciful unconsciousness, is a luxury utterly unknown in these desperate circumstances. You hear the low moans, the guttural screams, the desperate pleas of men fully conscious, their minds acutely aware of every cut, every severing motion. Surgeons, their faces grim and strained, work with horrifying speed, driven by the sheer volume of the wounded. Their hands stained crimson, they cut through living flesh, their improvised tools tearing and scraping, while the patient lies pinned, his body racked with pain, his mind trapped in the full, visceral experience of his own mutilation. The sounds are not of battle, but of suffering. The ragged breaths, the choked cries, the sickening squelch of tissue. The air in these makeshift operating rooms, already thick with the coppery scent of blood, is further polluted by a new, more horrifying smell. As wounds are cauterized, sealed by burning hot irons to prevent blood loss, the rooms fill with the acrid, sickening aroma of burned flesh. It clings to the walls, the makeshift bandages, the very clothing of those who work and suffer within. It's a smell that speaks of desperate measures, of agonizing survival, and of the raw, brutal reality of treating wounds too terrible to bear. This scent, unlike any other, becomes a pervasive memory, etching itself into the very fabric of the town's aftermath. A constant, silent reminder of the profound suffering. And everywhere, ceaselessly, there are flies, swarms of them, drawn by the scent of blood and decay, buzzing incessantly around the open wounds, landing on exposed flesh. A constant, maddening presence. Doctors, their hands busy with the gruesome work of saving lives, would swat them away almost instinctively, their movements fluid and practiced, a small, futile gesture against the overwhelming tide of insects. The rhythmic slap of a hand against skin, the persistent buzz, becomes another layer in the grim symphony of the field hospital. An irritating, inescapable reminder of the unsanitary conditions and the ever-present threat of infection. Survival rates, under such conditions, are tragically, unimaginably low. Many men, lying in agony, watching their comrades succumb, would begin to pray, not for victory, not for home, but for a swift, merciful bullet to end their suffering. The surgeons saw, with its promise of excruciating pain and often a lingering, agonizing death from infection, became a fate more terrifying than the immediate, clean oblivion of a bullet. To them, the battlefield, with its sudden, decisive violence, offered a quicker, perhaps kinder end than the prolonged, brutal agony of the makeshift hospital. It was a choice between two horrors, and many chose the finality of the former over the slow, torturous decline of the latter, a testament to the depths of their despair. Even amidst the deafening roar of battle and the piercing cries of the wounded, certain sounds would cut through the din, sinking deep into the quiet places of your soul. You would hear dying men, lying in the fields or in makeshift beds, their voices raw with pain, their minds reaching for the purest comfort they had ever known. And in those final moments, their last word, whispered or screamed into the chaotic air, would often be, "Mother." It was a sound that transcended the brutal divisions of war, a universal cry of primal need. Whether they wore the gray of the South or the blue of the North, whether they were enemies or allies, in their final despair, they were simply sons, united in a singular, profound longing for comfort, for the embrace of the one who gave them life. The sound would hang in the air, a haunting echo, a poignant reminder of the shared humanity lost in the madness of conflict. The shock of the battlefield, the unending horrors witnessed, the relentless presence of death, would push some men beyond the brink of sanity. You might stumble upon a soldier, or hear tell of one, amidst the fields of corpses, his face devoid of sorrow, his eyes wide and vacant. He would laugh, not a laugh of joy, or even of madness born of a particular trauma, but a hysterical, uncontrolled outburst of mirth, a chilling, hollow sound that seemed to mock the solemnity of death all around him. It was a profound, unsettling sound, so utterly out of place amidst the stillness of the fallen. A terrifying glimpse into the human mind's desperate attempt to cope when pushed beyond all endurance. This laughter, echoing over the silent bodies, was a testament to the fragility of the human spirit, a terrifying symptom of a soul fractured by the unholy spectacle of war. For the children growing up in Gettysburg, their formative years, their earliest memories, were irrevocably shaped not by the gentle rhythms of childhood, not by the laughter of schoolyards or the simple joys of playtime. Instead, their tender minds absorbed the sounds, the sights, the very essence of the battlefield. They remembered, not the quiet hum of bees in the garden, but the chilling sound of men dying just beyond their windows, sometimes even within the very confines of their own gardens. The familiar green spaces, once playgrounds for imagination, became silent witnesses to the final breaths of strangers. They learned to associate the scent of summer dust with the coppery tang of blood, the chirping of crickets with the distant groans of the wounded. Their earliest education was in the brutal realities of war, etching indelible marks upon their souls that no passage of time could truly erase. These were the true inheritors of Gettysburg's agony, their innocence forever stained by the memories of a world turned into a nightmare right on their doorstep. As the armies finally, mercifully moved on. A new, more insidious horror settled upon Gettysburg. The summer sun, usually a source of warmth and life, now became an accelerating agent of decay. Bodies, left unburied in the vast, open fields, began to swell grotesquely under the relentless heat. The natural processes of decomposition, usually hidden from view, unfolded in plain sight, shocking and unavoidable. Flesh bloated, skin stretched taut, and then, with a sickening sound that would forever haunt the memories of those who heard it, the bodies began to burst. It was a sight of profound, visceral repulsion, a testament to the sheer scale of the unburied dead. And with the decay came the flies, countless, unimaginable swarms of them. A buzzing, undulating mass that seemed to blot out the very sun. Their collective hum a constant, irritating drone that pervaded the air, a living testament to the vast, festering graveyard that Gettysburg had become. The ground, once a source of life-giving water, became a vector of disease. Wells, relied upon for drinking and cooking, filled with the runoff from the thousands of corpses. The water, once clear and cool, turned murky, tainted with the silent, invisible presence of death. Disease began to spread, an insidious, quiet killer, claiming lives that had survived the immediate violence of the battle. Typhoid, dysentery, fevers of unknown origin, these illnesses swept through the vulnerable civilian population. A grim secondary wave of casualties, the very act of drawing water, a simple, life-sustaining ritual, became a perilous gamble, a constant reminder of the unseen dangers that lingered beneath the surface of their shattered world. Even in their homes, the boundaries between life and death blurred, then vanished entirely. Gettysburg families, exhausted and traumatized, found themselves living in an unbearable intimacy with the dying. Their homes, once private sanctuaries, were still filled with dozens of wounded soldiers, some barely clinging to life, their groans and ragged breaths a constant, disturbing presence in the quiet of the night. You would lie in your own bed, or perhaps on a makeshift cot in a corner, just feet away from a young man coughing out his last breath, or muttering deliriously in a language you didn't understand. There was no escape, no private space untouched by the pervasive shadow of death. Life and death coexisted in a brutal, undeniable proximity, a shared, silent vigil where the living were forced to bear witness to the slow, agonizing departure of strangers within their very walls. And then there was the smell. Even after the armies had finally departed, leaving behind their dead and wounded, even after the frantic, desperate efforts to bury the fallen had begun, the scent remained. It was a pervasive, clinging odor, a complex, nauseating blend of decay, of old blood, of gunpowder, of human waste. It permeated everything: the air, the soil, the very fabric of their clothing, the wood of their homes. It was a silent, invisible haunting, a constant reminder of the horror that had unfolded. For years, long after the physical scars on the landscape began to heal, that smell would linger, a phantom presence, triggered by a shift in the wind, a rise in the humidity, a quiet, internal memory that refused to fade. Gettysburg was not just a town, it was a memory that could be smelled, a profound, lingering fragrance of death that marked it forever. In the years that followed, as the wounds of war slowly began to scab over, Gettysburg transformed in the national consciousness. It became a profound symbol of sacrifice, a sacred ground where the very soul of a young nation had been forged in fire and blood. Abraham Lincoln's timeless address would immortalize it, imbuing the fields and hills with a national purpose, a profound meaning that resonated across a divided country. The name Gettysburg would come to stand for something grand, something unifying, a testament to the enduring principles of liberty and equality. But for the locals, for those who had lived through the inferno, their memories were not of speeches, of grand pronouncements, or of abstract national ideals. Their memories were visceral, intimate, and deeply personal. They were the relentless buzz of flies that blotted out the summer sun. They were the grotesque, swollen forms of the dead, lying in their fields, in their gardens. They were the interminable nights spent listening to the agonized groans of dying men, echoing from beneath their very floors, through the thin walls of their homes. Their remembrance was a tapestry woven from the tangible horrors, the smell of decay that lingered for years, the stain of blood on their church floors, the innocent curiosity of children drawn to piles of severed limbs. These were the realities that defined Gettysburg for them. A constant, raw wound that no amount of eloquent words could ever truly heal. The Union victory at Gettysburg, undoubtedly, marked a turning point in the colossal struggle that was the Civil War. It shifted the tide, pushing the Confederacy back, setting the stage for the eventual preservation of the Union. It was, by all accounts, a victory of immense historical significance. Yet, for those who had lived through it, the cost was immeasurable, paid not just in lives lost on the battlefield, but in the profound, irreparable scars left upon their souls. These were wounds that never truly healed, memories that remained sharp and vivid, shaping their understanding of life, death, and the very meaning of peace. The triumph of a nation came at an intimate, personal price that reverberated through generations, a quiet, lingering sorrow beneath the surface of the grand historical narrative. And so, as you sit here, perhaps in your own quiet home, untouched by such a cataclysm, a final, gentle question drifts into your thoughts, carried on the soft breeze of reflection. If your home, the very ground beneath your feet, became a graveyard in just 3 short days, if its every corner became a witness to unspeakable suffering, if the air itself carried the lingering scent of death for years, would you still believe in the simple, comforting meaning of victory? Or would that word, so often associated with triumph and glory, be forever stained by the profound, personal cost of the peace that followed, and perhaps in the quiet of your own space? The answer itself is not as important as the gentle, lingering contemplation of such a profound question. Imagine the spring of 1865. The scent of gunpowder still hung heavy in the humid air over much of the American South. Yet an unfamiliar quiet began to settle over the shattered landscape. The grand, ambitious, yet ultimately doomed dream of the Confederacy was not just fading. It was crumbling, stone by painful stone. The very heart of its power, the city of Richmond, Virginia, once a defiant symbol, now lay in ashes, its elegant buildings scarred, its streets choked with the debris of a lost cause. The fall of Richmond was not merely a military defeat. It was a psychological earthquake, reverberating through every corner of the secessionist states, signaling the undeniable end. As Union troops marched through its hallowed, now despoiled, thoroughfares, the Confederate government itself became a phantom, a desperate, fleeting entity. Its leaders, including the president, Jefferson Davis, were no longer rulers of a nascent nation, but rather fugitives, scattering into the vast, uncertain wilderness of a defeated land. Their flight was not one of strategic retreat, but of panicked dispersal, a frantic scattering in the face of an overwhelming, relentless tide. Each step they took further confirmed the irretrievable loss of their cause. Each whisper of an approaching blue uniform amplified the despair. The capture of Jefferson Davis, the man who had embodied the Confederacy's aspirations and its stubborn defiance, occurred far from the grand stages of war. It happened in the quiet, almost overlooked pine forests near Irwinville, Georgia. The setting itself felt like a metaphor for the Confederacy's demise, not a grand, climatic battle, but a quiet, almost forlorn capture in a place of humble anonymity. It was a moment laden with profound symbolism, the head of the defeated nation, apprehended not in a blaze of glory or a final stand, but in a quiet dawn, stripped of his authority, his dreams, and his freedom. With their leader imprisoned, the remaining Confederate elite found themselves in an agonizing limbo. Some, utterly broken by the weight of defeat and the sheer exhaustion of years of conflict, chose the path of immediate surrender, stepping forward with weary shoulders and heavy hearts to accept their fate. Whatever it might be, others, still clinging to a desperate hope, or perhaps fueled by a fear of reprisal, melted into the shadows, seeking refuge in anonymity, attempting to disappear into the vastness of the South or beyond its borders. And a few, perhaps the most defiant or the most deluded, whispered of exile, dreaming of distant shores where their ideology might find new soil, or where they might simply escape the consequences of their actions. This was the dawn of an entirely new, deeply uncertain chapter for these men. They had once commanded armies, shaped policies, and inspired millions. Now, they were simply individuals, grappling with personal ruin, political disenfranchisement, and the profound psychological burden of leading a nation to its demise. The world they had fought for was gone, irrevocably altered, and they, the architects of that lost world, stood on the precipice of futures that were as varied as they were unknown. The once clear lines of purpose had blurred into a misty uncertainty, and each man had to decide, in the quiet of his own conscience, how to navigate this new, daunting landscape. The narrative of Jefferson Davis, after his capture in the Georgian wilderness, quickly transformed from that of a defiant leader to a symbol of fallen power, a prisoner bearing the immense weight of a lost cause. His destination was Fort Monroe, Virginia, a formidable stone fortress perched stoically at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. This wasn't just a prison. It was a stark, unyielding monument to federal authority, designed to break spirits as much as to hold bodies. The conditions of his incarceration were deliberately harsh, almost immediately sparking both outrage and debate across the fractured nation. He was initially held in a casemate, a thick-walled, vaulted chamber typically used for artillery, which felt more like a dungeon than a conventional cell. The air inside was often damp, heavy with the scent of salt and stone, and barely illuminated by the faint light filtering through small, barred openings. For a man who had led a government and lived a life of relative comfort, this confinement was a brutal shock, a constant reminder of his utter powerlessness. Reports describe him being shackled, a humiliation deeply felt by a man of his rigid pride and aristocratic bearing. this act, whether out of genuine security concerns or a desire to symbolize the complete subjugation of the Confederate leader, ignited a furious response from Southern sympathizers and even some Northern voices who viewed it as excessively cruel. The clink of chains, the constant presence of guards, the damp chill permeating his very bones. These were the grim realities that defined his days within those cold stone walls. The specter of a treason trial loomed large over Davis for over 2 years. A legal quagmire fraught with immense political and constitutional implications. The question was not just whether he was guilty of treason, but whether a former president of a self-proclaimed nation could even be tried for treason by the government from which he claimed to have seceded. The legal complexities were immense. The political ramifications even more so. A conviction could set a dangerous precedent, potentially leading to a cascade of trials for other Confederate leaders, further tearing at the fabric of a nation desperately trying to heal. Conversely, an acquittal or a failure to prosecute could be seen as an endorsement of secessionist principles, undermining the Union's victory. The debate raged in legal circles and across the nation, a slow, agonizing process that mirrored the broader struggle of Reconstruction. Ultimately, in 1867, after months of legal maneuvering and intense public pressure, Davis was released on bail, never to face trial. The air he breathed upon leaving Fort Monroe must have felt dramatically different, lighter, yet still burdened by the weight of his past. Released but financially ruined, Davis found himself adrift in a transformed world. His plantations were gone, his wealth dissipated, and his reputation, for many, irrevocably stained. He received job offers, some from surprising sources, but his unyielding pride, his inability to compromise on the principles he still held dear, led him to reject most of them. He could not bring himself to work for the very system he had fought against. Nor could he easily accept a position that might diminish his perceived status. His refusal to fully acknowledge defeat, to express regret for the war, kept him isolated in many ways. An echo of the Old South, unwilling to adapt to the new. For a brief period, he took on the presidency of the Carolina Life Insurance Company in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a foray into the prosaic world of business, a stark contrast to the grand pronouncements of wartime leadership. This role, however, proved to be a difficult fit for a man whose life had been dedicated to politics and the military. And his tenure was relatively short-lived, offering little financial or personal solace. His later years were largely devoted to writing his memoirs, a massive undertaking titled The Rise and Fall of the Confederate Government. This monumental work, intended to justify the Confederate cause and his leadership, was penned largely at the Mississippi home of Sarah Dorsey, a wealthy and sympathetic widow who provided him with a quiet refuge and financial support. It was in this peaceful, yet intellectually demanding, environment that Davis meticulously crafted his defense, seeking to shape the historical narrative from his perspective, to explain his actions, and to immortalize the principles he believed in. The quiet scratching of his pen must have often been accompanied by the rustling leaves outside, a soft counterpoint to the tempestuous events he recounted on the page. Jefferson Davis passed away in New Orleans, Louisiana, in December 1889 at the age of 81. Despite his controversial legacy and his refusal to recant his secessionist beliefs, his death prompted a powerful outpouring of grief and remembrance across the South. His funeral procession, a grand and solemn affair, moved slowly through the streets of Richmond, Virginia, the former capital of the Confederacy, drawing immense crowds. It was a powerful, emotional display. A final, collective mourning for the man who had been the face of their lost nation. A poignant testament to the enduring, complex hold the lost cause narrative continued to exert over the hearts and minds of many Southerners. The quiet whispers of the crowd, the rustle of their clothes, the solemn tolling of bells, all spoke of a shared sorrow for a past that, for many, still felt profoundly real. Among the prominent figures of the fallen Confederacy, Alexander H. Stephens stands out as a man whose post-war life was marked by a peculiar blend of quiet resilience, unwavering conviction, and an almost tenacious return to the very political stage he had once defied. As the Vice President of the Confederacy, his fate after the war's conclusion was, predictably, one of immediate apprehension. In May 1865, he was arrested by Union forces, his flight from Richmond having led him back to his home state of Georgia, where he was apprehended and transported to Fort Warren, a federal prison situated on an island in Boston Harbor. His imprisonment, though relatively brief compared to Davis's, lasted for approximately 5 months. For a man of Stephens's delicate constitution and sharp intellect, accustomed to the comfort of his library and the rigorous debates of legislative halls, the confinement must have been a profoundly isolating and physically taxing experience. The cold, damp air of the North, the relentless scrutiny of his captors, the sheer weight of his situation, all contributed to a period of deep introspection. Yet it seemingly did little to sway his fundamental beliefs regarding states' rights and the legality of secession. The distant cries of gulls over the harbor waters, the subtle rocking of the island itself, perhaps offered a strange, muted backdrop to his internal struggles. Upon his release in October 1865, Stephens returned to a Georgia reeling from the wounds of war and the uncertainties of Reconstruction. Despite having been a prominent figure in the rebellion, the people of Georgia, still largely sympathetic to the Confederate cause and their perceived grievances, quickly elected him to the U.S. Senate in 1866. This act, however, was a direct challenge to the federal government's authority and its ongoing efforts to reshape the South. The radical Republicans in Congress, determined to punish the former Confederates and ensure the rights of freedmen, swiftly barred him, and indeed many other former Confederates, from taking their seats. The halls of power in Washington, once familiar to him, now remained inaccessible, echoing with the stern rejection of his past actions. Undeterred by this political setback, Stephens turned his formidable intellect to the task of defending the Confederacy's cause through the written word. In 1868, he published his substantial 2-volume work, A Constitutional View of the Late War Between the States. This tome was not merely a historical account. It was a deeply argued polemic, an elaborate legal and historical justification for secession. In it, he meticulously laid out his contention that the war was not a rebellion, but rather an act of northern aggression against sovereign states defending their constitutional rights, particularly the right to self-governance and, by extension, the institution of slavery. He framed the conflict not as a moral crusade against slavery, but as a clash over fundamental interpretations of the Union, presenting a powerful, if deeply flawed, intellectual foundation for what would become known as the lost cause narrative. The quiet rustle of pages, the steady flow of ink, became his new battlefield, where he continued to wage a war of ideas. Despite his prominent role in the secession movement and his literary defense of its principles, the political landscape of Georgia eventually shifted enough, and the fervor of Reconstruction softened sufficiently. for Stevens to find his way back into mainstream politics. He served multiple terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, a remarkable testament to his enduring popularity among his constituents and his undeniable rhetorical skills. Within the very Congress he had once fled, he now sat, a living embodiment of the South's struggle to find its place within the reunited nation. His voice, though no longer calling for disunion, still carried the distinct accent of his Southern convictions. In a poignant culmination of his long and complex career, Alexander H. Stevens was elected governor of Georgia in 1882. It was a significant moment, a return to the very pinnacle of state power for a man who had once been imprisoned for his leadership of a rebellious government. His victory signaled a degree of reconciliation, or at least acceptance, within the state itself. However, his health, always frail, had been further undermined by the rigors of his life. He served only a very short time as governor, passing away just a few months after his inauguration in March 1883. His death closed a chapter on a life dedicated to a particular, deeply held vision of America, leaving behind a legacy as complex and debated as the war itself. The final, gentle sigh of his passing seemed to carry with it the echoes of his unwavering, deeply embedded beliefs, fading into the quiet history of a nation still grappling with its past. Among the many figures touched by the crucible of the Civil War, Robert E. Lee's post-surrender life stands as perhaps the most poignant and, in many ways, the most morally impactful. Unlike many of his compatriots who faced imprisonment or flight, Lee was never formally arrested. His surrender at Appomattox, dignified and direct, marked not only the end of the Army of Northern Virginia, but also the beginning of his deliberate, carefully chosen path towards national reconciliation. The very act of his surrender, offered with a quiet grace, set a tone for many across the South. Yet, the victory of the Union came with its own set of consequences for Lee, not least of which was the confiscation of his beloved estate. Arlington, the magnificent property overlooking Washington, D.C., which had been his cherished home and his wife's inheritance, was seized by the federal government during the war. It was transformed into a national cemetery, a silent, sprawling tribute to the Union dead. Imagine the quiet ache in his heart, knowing that the familiar hills and stately trees of his ancestral home now sheltered the very soldiers he had fought against. A stark and permanent reminder of the immense cost of the conflict. The land that once knew his children's laughter now held the profound solemnity of countless graves, a profound and visible symbol of his personal and public loss. In the immediate aftermath of the war, Lee's voice was perhaps the most influential for a shattered South. He used his immense prestige and moral authority not to incite further resistance or to lament the lost cause, but to advocate, unequivocally, for surrender and reconciliation. His counsel was clear. Southerners must accept the outcome of the war, lay down their arms, and endeavor to be good citizens of the reunited United States. This was a difficult message for a proud people, but it was delivered with such earnest conviction that it carried significant weight. He urged them to look forward, not back, to rebuild, not to cling to futile hope of renewed conflict. His public statements were measured, devoid of bitterness, focusing instead on the practical necessity of peace and unity. Lee also expressed support for the education of freedmen, a stance that was remarkably progressive for a former Confederate general, particularly one who had owned enslaved people. while he did not actively campaign for racial equality in the modern sense. His endorsement of education was a quiet acknowledgement of the need for the newly emancipated population to have the tools to navigate their freedom. This was a nuanced position. However, as he staunchly opposed the 15th Amendment, which granted black men the right to vote, his views on race were still rooted in the paternalistic assumptions of his era. But his advocacy for education demonstrated a pragmatic, if limited, recognition of the changing social order. The quiet rustle of school books, the hopeful murmur of voices learning to read, would have been a sound he conceptually supported, even as other aspects of the new racial landscape remained unsettling to him. Perhaps the most significant chapter of Lee's post-war life began when he accepted the presidency of Washington College, a small, struggling institution in Lexington, Virginia, in 1865. This decision was a profound statement in itself. The great general, the military icon, chose to dedicate his remaining years not to politics or the pursuit of wealth, but to the quiet, dignified work of education. Under his leadership, the college, later renamed Washington and Lee University in his honor, underwent a remarkable transformation. He broadened its curriculum, introducing practical subjects like engineering and journalism alongside the traditional classics. Recognizing the need for the youth of the South to be equipped for a rapidly changing industrializing nation. More importantly, he instilled in his students a philosophy of unity, hard work, and civic duty, consistently emphasizing the importance of accepting the Union and rebuilding their lives. The quiet cadence of his lectures, the gentle murmur of students in the campus halls, became the new rhythm of his life. Lee deliberately avoided involvement in politics, recognizing that his continued presence in that arena would only serve to inflame old divisions. He chose instead to be a quiet example, a calming influence in a turbulent time. His actions and words consistently underscored the importance of healing and national reconciliation. He moved through his final years with a quiet dignity, a man who had faced immense responsibility and crushing defeat, now seeking to guide the next generation towards a more peaceful future. Robert E. Lee passed away peacefully in October 1870 at the age of 63, just 5 years after the war's end. His death prompted an outpouring of national mourning, even in the North, recognizing his role in urging the South towards peace. His legacy remains complex, a figure both revered and debated. But his post-war embrace of reconciliation, education, and civic duty undeniably left a profound mark on the process of national healing. The gentle rustle of leaves over his grave, the quiet whisper of history, remembers a man who chose a path of peace amidst the echoes of war. Among the various post-war fates of Confederate leaders, that of Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard offers a fascinating study in reinvention and pragmatic adaptation. A dashing figure during the war, known for commanding the first shots at Fort Sumter and for his involvement in several key battles, Beauregard emerged from the conflict with a reputation, but also with the immense challenge of rebuilding a life in a defeated South. Crucially, after the war, Beauregard chose a path of explicit loyalty to the United States. He swore an oath of allegiance, a significant step that many of his peers struggled with. This act, while perhaps pragmatic, was also a clear signal of his intention to move forward within the reunited nation, rather than clinging to the past or fostering continued dissent. It was a conscious decision to lay down the sword of rebellion and pick up the tools of civic life. The quiet solemnity of the oath, the faint rustle of the flag above, must have marked a significant turning point in his mind. For a time, There were whispers and even offers of foreign military service for Beauregard. Nations grappling with their own internal conflicts or seeking to modernize their armies recognized his military genius. He was reportedly approached by the governments of Egypt and Romania, amongst others, with offers of high command. One can imagine the allure of such opportunities for a professional soldier stripped of his command. The chance to once again stand at the head of an army, to apply his strategic mind on a new stage. However, after careful consideration, Beauregard declined these offers. Perhaps it was a quiet weariness with conflict, a desire to stay rooted in his own land, or a commitment to his oath of loyalty. But he chose not to seek glory abroad. The distant sounds of foreign bugles, the imagined dust of distant battlefields, faded into the background as he set his gaze closer to home. Instead, Beauregard turned his considerable talents and organizational skills to the nascent, yet rapidly expanding, American railroad industry. He embarked on a career as a railway engineer and superintendent, a rather surprising pivot for a decorated general. This was a demanding, practical field, far removed from the grand strategies of battle. He worked for the New Orleans, Jackson and Great Northern Railroad, and later for the New Orleans and Carrollton Railroad. His duties involved overseeing construction, managing operations, and ensuring the smooth running of these vital arteries of commerce. The rhythmic chug of the locomotive, the distant shriek of its whistle, the smell of coal smoke and creosote. These became the new sensory backdrop to his days, a tangible symbol of progress and rebuilding. Beauregard's willingness to cooperate with the federal government and his relatively quick pardon allowed him to re-enter the political sphere in Louisiana. What is particularly noteworthy is his pragmatic approach to the rapidly changing racial dynamics of the post-war South. Unlike many of his former comrades who harbored deep resentment towards the newly enfranchised black population, Beauregard publicly advocated for black political participation and even cooperated with black politicians during Reconstruction. He supported integrated rail cars and, in a significant public address, urged racial harmony, arguing that the future of the South depended on cooperation between white and black citizens. This progressive stance, though born perhaps of a mix of genuine conviction and political expediency, was remarkable for its time and for his background, setting him apart from many of his peers who clung to white supremacy. The quiet hum of discussions, the gentle murmur of compromise in political halls, replaced the shouts of command. His innovative spirit also led him to introduce cable cars to the city of New Orleans, a significant urban improvement that transformed public transportation in the Crescent City. He served as the Commissioner of Public Works for the city, a role that allowed him to bring practical solutions to urban challenges. The rhythmic clatter and gentle sway of the cable cars, navigating the vibrant streets of New Orleans, became a small, yet enduring, part of his tangible legacy, a testament to his ability to embrace new technologies and improve daily life. In his later years, Beauregard gained considerable wealth through his involvement with the Louisiana Lottery Company. This enterprise, while immensely profitable, was also deeply controversial, widely regarded as corrupt and exploitative. His association with it stained his reputation for some, even as it secured his financial future. It was a pragmatic move that brought him prosperity, though perhaps at a moral cost for those who looked on with disapproval. The rustle of paper money, the hushed whispers of deals, were the less savory sounds of his later success. P.G.T. Beauregard passed away in New Orleans in February 1893 at the age of 74. His life after the war was a complex tapestry of military legacy, surprising civilian achievement, and a pragmatic embrace of a new era. He embodied a particular kind of Southern resilience, one that recognized the irreversible nature of defeat and found new ways to contribute, even if some of those ways remained tinged with controversy. The quiet, lapping waters of the Mississippi, flowing past New Orleans, might have seemed to carry the echoes of his diverse, adaptive life. A testament to a general who learned to build railways and cable cars instead of commanding armies. Joseph E. Johnston, a seasoned and often cautious Confederate general, navigated the post-war landscape with a quiet dignity and a surprising level of respect, even from his former adversaries. Unlike some of his more defiant peers, Johnston's pragmatic approach to warfare and his gentlemanly demeanor had earned him the admiration of prominent Union generals, particularly Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman. This mutual respect, forged in the crucible of battle, proved invaluable in the years after the cannons fell silent. At the very end of the war, when Johnston surrendered his forces to Sherman in North Carolina, the terms were remarkably lenient, a testament to the trust and esteem between the two commanders. Grant, too, held Johnston in high regard, often speaking of him as an honorable and capable opponent. This positive regard from the Union High Command likely shielded Johnston from the harsher treatment meted out to some other Confederate leaders, allowing him a more immediate path back into civilian life. The quiet, almost deferential, conversations between these former foes, even amidst the backdrop of surrender, hinted at a deeper understanding of the shared burden of leadership. Like many of his contemporaries, Johnston found the transition to civilian life challenging in a war-torn economy. He sought opportunities in the burgeoning industries of the New South, particularly in railroads and insurance. He worked as president of the Alabama and Tennessee River Railroad, and later as an agent for an express company and a life insurance company. These roles, while far removed from the thunder of cavalry charges, required a similar blend of organizational skill, strategic thinking, and diligent attention to detail. The rhythmic clack of train wheels, the quiet rustle of insurance policies, became the sounds of his new professional world, a world focused on reconstruction rather than destruction. His post-war career also included a brief foray into politics. Joseph E. Johnston served one term in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the state of Virginia from 1879 to 1881. It was a quieter, less prominent political role than some of his peers undertook, but it marked his formal re-entry into the legislative process of the reunited nation. In the hallowed halls of Congress, the echoes of past debates surely lingered, but Johnston himself carried a demeanor of quiet resolve, focusing on the practical needs of his constituents rather than relitigating old grievances. What truly set Johnston apart, however, was his remarkable ability to maintain genuine friendships with his former Union adversaries. He forged a particularly close bond with William Tecumseh Sherman, the very general whose march to the sea had laid waste to much of the Confederacy. They frequently corresponded, exchanged gifts, and even took vacations together, demonstrating a profound capacity for reconciliation that transcended the bitter divisions of the war. Their shared experiences, the immense weight of command they both carried, seemed to create a unique understanding between them. The quiet conversations between these two old warriors, perhaps over a shared meal or on a peaceful porch, must have been filled with unspoken memories, punctuated by the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. The most poignant testament to this enduring friendship came in February 1891, when Joseph E. Johnston, at the age of 84, traveled to New York City to attend the funeral of his dear friend, William Tecumseh Sherman. Despite a driving rain and bitterly cold weather, Johnston, frail but determined, insisted on standing bareheaded throughout the outdoor ceremony, a final act of profound respect for his longtime friend and former foe. The relentless drizzle, the cold biting wind, seemed to mirror the lingering chill of grief. Yet Johnston remained steadfast. Shortly after returning home, Johnston contracted pneumonia, his weakened constitution unable to withstand the exposure. He passed away just a few weeks later, his death, so closely following Sherman's, was seen by many as a powerful symbol of the final, quiet passing of the generation that had fought the Civil War, and perhaps, too, of the enduring possibility of healing. The quiet falling of the rain, the solemnity of the funeral, and the shared vulnerability of two old men, one grieving the other, painted a picture of reconciliation that transcended political boundaries. Joseph E. Johnston, a general known for his tactical retreats, made his final, gentle advance into history, leaving behind a legacy not just of military service, but of quiet respect and enduring friendship, a soft whisper against the harsh echoes of war. Few figures from the Confederate pantheon evoke as complex and disturbing a mix of admiration and revulsion as Nathan Bedford Forrest. His life story, both before and after the war, is a testament to the turbulent, often violent, undercurrents of American history, particularly concerning race, known pre-war as a successful, if brutal, slave trader. Forrest amassed a considerable fortune through the grim business of human bondage. This early life laid a dark foundation for his later actions. When the war erupted, he transformed into a brilliant, ruthless cavalry commander, a master of swift, decisive raids, inspiring fear and respect in equal measure. His military maxim, "Get thar fustest with the mostest," became legendary, reflecting his aggressive, no-nonsense approach. However, Forrest's wartime legacy is indelibly stained by the Fort Pillow Massacre in April 1864. This horrific event saw Confederate troops, under his command, overwhelm a Union garrison composed largely of black soldiers and white Tennessean Unionists. After the fort surrendered, many of the Union soldiers, particularly the black troops, were brutally slaughtered, often while attempting to surrender. The cries of the victims, the relentless sound of gunfire, the terrible stillness that followed. These echoes of violence forever attach themselves to Forrest's name, a stark reminder of the barbarity that could erupt in the throes of conflict and racial hatred. The incident remains a deeply controversial and painful chapter, a testament to the capacity for human cruelty. In the immediate aftermath of the war, as the South grappled with defeat and the seismic shifts of Reconstruction, Forrest emerged as a central and deeply troubling figure in the nascent white supremacist movement. He became the very first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan in the late 1860s. Under his leadership, the Klan grew from a collection of loosely organized veterans clubs into a formidable, terrifying instrument of racial terror, using intimidation, violence, and murder to undermine Reconstruction efforts and reassert white control over the newly freed black population. The whispers of fear in the night, the haunting rustle of their cloaks, the sudden, brutal violence. These were the hallmarks of the Klan's early years under Forrest's implicit, if not always explicit, direction. Yet, in a bizarre and ultimately surprising twist to his dark legacy, Forrest eventually grew disillusioned with the Klan. The organization's uncontrolled violence, its descent into lawlessness and indiscriminate terror, even against white Southerners who supported Reconstruction, proved too much even for him. He formally ordered the Klan to disband in 1869, though it continued to operate, albeit in a more fractured and less centralized manner. This decision, from a man so intimately connected with its origins, revealed a flicker of a different conscience, a recognition that the beast he helped unleash had become uncontrollable. More astonishingly, in his final years, Nathan Bedford Forrest made public statements that appeared to advocate for the rights of Black Americans and even for the punishment of white attackers who perpetrated violence against them. In an address to the Independent Order of Pallbearers Association, an organization of African American citizens, in 1875, he famously said, "I have been asked to say something. I will say that I was a Ku Klux once. I have done that which I want to do. I have done it. I am glad that I am done with it. I want to live in peace with all men." He also spoke of his belief in the unity of the races and urged cooperation. These pronouncements, from the architect of the Klan and a former slave trader, were truly remarkable. A bewildering shift in perspective that continues to baffle and divide historians. Was it genuine change, a softening of his hardened views, or a pragmatic acknowledgement of the changing times? The quiet, stunned silence that might have met such words from such a man in that era can only be imagined. Nathan Bedford Forrest died in October 1877 from complications of diabetes at the age of 56. His death closed the book on a life that profoundly embodied the contradictions and brutal realities of the South. His legacy remains a subject of intense debate and painful memory, a stark reminder of the deep scars left by slavery, war, and racial hatred, and the unsettling question of whether and how men can truly change. The quiet earth receiving his body held secrets and a history that continued to ripple through the American consciousness. A complex symphony of darkness and fleeting, surprising light. The narrative of Thomas Stonewall Jackson, perhaps the most iconic and revered of all Confederate generals, takes a unique turn in the post-war discussion because, unlike his peers, he did not live to see the Confederacy's demise. His story is one of a legend forged in the heat of battle and cemented by a tragic, untimely death that occurred well before the final surrender. This very fact cemented his almost mythical status, allowing him to escape the bitter realities of defeat, reconstruction, and the complex choices faced by those who survived. It was in the gathering dusk of May 2nd, 1863, during the pivotal Battle of Chancellorsville, that fate intervened in the most cruel and ironic manner. After leading a brilliant flanking maneuver that shattered the Union lines, Jackson, ever the aggressive and daring commander, was riding back to his own lines in the fading light, attempting to reconnoiter the front. In the confusion and dim visibility of the battlefield, mistaken for an enemy cavalryman by his own men of the 18th North Carolina Infantry, he was accidentally shot. The sudden crack of rifle fire, the sharp cry of pain, the immediate onset of chaos among his own troops. These were the sounds that marked the beginning of the end for Stonewall Jackson. The air, heavy with the smell of gunpowder and the anxiety of battle, seemed to hold its breath around him. The wounds, though severe, were not immediately fatal. He was shot in the arm and shoulder, and his arm later had to be amputated for several days. Hope flickered among his staff and the anxious Confederate high command. However, complications, likely pneumonia, set in, exacerbated by the primitive medical knowledge and conditions of the era. The quiet, labored breathing in his sickbed, the hushed conversations of his doctors, the gentle, concerned whispers of his staff. These were the somber sounds that filled his final days. Thomas Stonewall Jackson succumbed to his wounds on May 10, 1863, just 8 days after being shot. His death sent a shockwave of grief and despair throughout the Confederacy. It was a loss of monumental proportions, robbing the South of one of its most brilliant, aggressive, and deeply religious commanders. A general whom Robert E. Lee famously said had lost his left arm, but I have lost my right. The quiet and profound sorrow that settled over the Confederate States was palpable, a premonition, perhaps, of the ultimate doom that lay ahead. Because he died before the Confederacy's collapse, Jackson was spared the agonizing experience of defeat, surrender, and the harsh realities of Reconstruction. He never had to grapple with the shame of capture, the indignity of imprisonment, or the struggle to rebuild a life in a world that had rejected his cause. Instead, his memory remained untainted by failure, frozen in time as the defiant, unyielding hero of the Confederacy. Immediately upon his death, Stonewall Jackson ascended into the realm of legend. He became a posthumous symbol of Southern bravery, piety, and military genius, an embodiment of the lost cause ideal before the cause was even truly lost. His image, often depicted as stern, unyielding, and divinely favored, became a powerful rallying point, an inspiration for generations of Southerners who clung to the memory of their struggle. The quiet reverence in which his name was spoken, the solemn retelling of his exploits, ensured his eternal place in the pantheon of Confederate heroes. The gentle whisper of the wind through the trees of the Shenandoah Valley, a region he knew so well, seemed to carry his name, echoing his enduring, tragic legend. George Pickett's name is forever etched into the annals of American history, not primarily for his entire military career, but for a single, harrowing moment, Pickett's charge at the Battle of Gettysburg on July 3, 1863. This ill-fated frontal assault against the Union center at Cemetery Ridge became the Confederacy's high watermark, a desperate, valiant, yet ultimately catastrophic push that ended in devastating slaughter for his division. The memory of that terrible day, the thunderous roar of cannons, the relentless crackle of musketry, the screams of dying men, and the crushing weight of utter defeat would forever cast a long, somber shadow over his life. In the immediate aftermath of the war, unlike some of his fellow generals, Pickett harbored a profound fear of prosecution. The specter of a court-martial, or even charges of treason, loomed large in his mind, particularly given the immense human cost of his charge and the widespread belief that it was a suicidal folly. This fear was so potent that he briefly fled the United States, seeking refuge in the quiet safety of Canada. Imagine the chilling northern air on his face, the hushed anonymity of a foreign land, a stark contrast to the familiar, yet now dangerous, landscape of his native Virginia. The distant, muted sounds of a foreign city would have been a poor substitute for the comfort of home, yet offered the promise of escape. However, Pickett eventually decided to return to the United States. His decision was bolstered by the quiet reassurance, and indeed protection, offered by Ulysses S. Grant. The former Union commander, now General-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, intervened on Pickett's behalf, suggesting that general amnesty be granted to all former Confederates, thereby alleviating Pickett's fear of immediate arrest and trial. Grant's quiet, firm words, perhaps a silent acknowledgement of shared military burden, provided the necessary assurance for Pickett to return home. Upon his return, Pickett sought to re-enter the U.S. Army, petitioning for reinstatement. It was a desperate attempt to reclaim a life that had been defined by military service, to find a place within the new national structure. However, this request was ultimately denied. Despite Grant's goodwill, the political climate was still too volatile, the wounds of war too fresh, for such a prominent Confederate commander to be welcomed back into the ranks of the very army he had so recently fought against. The quiet, formal rejection, perhaps delivered in a stiff, official letter, would have felt like a final closing of a door he desperately wished to reopen. With his military career irrevocably closed, George Pickett turned to more prosaic, yet essential, forms of livelihood. He first tried his hand at farming in his native Virginia, seeking to cultivate a new life from the scarred earth. The rhythmic swing of the plow, the quiet growth of crops, would have offered a stark contrast to the organized chaos of battle. But farming in the ravaged post-war South was a challenging and often unrewarding endeavor. He then transitioned into the insurance business, a common path for many former military men seeking a stable income in the burgeoning post-war economy. This was a life of quiet sales pitches, meticulous paperwork, and the steady hum of a developing financial world, far removed from the roar of battle. George Pickett died in July 1875 at the relatively young age of 50. His passing, like his life after Gettysburg, was overshadowed by the memory of that single, terrible charge. He remained, for many, the tragic figure of the Confederacy's most desperate gamble, a man whose name was synonymous with courage and immense loss. The quiet whisper of history, forever intertwining his name with the bloody fields of Gettysburg, ensured that the shadow of that day remained a permanent part of his legacy. The gentle rustle of leaves over his grave, the distant, timeless echo of cannons, seemed to speak of a life defined by a singular, unforgettable moment, a perpetual whisper of the past. As the final echoes of the Civil War faded into the quiet hum of Reconstruction, the lives of the Confederate leaders, once bound by a common cause, diverged into a vast and varied tapestry of fates. Their experiences, though rooted in the shared trauma of defeat, unfolded in remarkably disparate ways, reflecting individual character, the shifting political winds, and the deep scars left upon the American South. The quiet contemplation of their destinies reveals not a single narrative, but a mosaic of human resilience, stubborn pride, quiet reconciliation, and sometimes enduring darkness. Some, like Jefferson Davis, faced the harsh indignity of prison cells, the cold stone and damp air serving as stark reminders of their lost power. His long, drawn-out legal battles and subsequent life in relative poverty showcased a man clinging fiercely to his convictions, unable or unwilling to fully embrace the new reality. His path was one of a defiant, unrepentant figure. The quiet rustle of his memoirs, a testament to his continued battle to shape history from his perspective. Others found their way back into the very political systems they had once rebelled against. Alexander H. Stephens, after his own brief imprisonment, remarkably returned to the halls of Congress and even served as governor of Georgia. His story is one of a tenacious, intellectual defiance. A man who, despite setbacks, continued to advocate for his deeply held beliefs within the framework of the reunited nation. His voice a consistent, if quiet, reminder of the states' rights argument. The path of reconciliation, perhaps the most noble in the eyes of many, was embraced by figures like Robert E. Lee and Joseph E. Johnston Lee, with immense personal sacrifice and quiet dignity, chose not to cling to past grievances, but to dedicate his remaining years to education and the healing of a fractured society. His work at Washington College, his quiet advocacy for unity, stood as a powerful example. Johnston, too, forged remarkable friendships with his former Union adversaries, particularly William Tecumseh Sherman, embodying a spirit of post-war camaraderie that transcended the bitterness of battle. The gentle murmur of their conversations, the shared understanding between old warriors, spoke volumes about the capacity for human connection amidst profound division. Then there were those who reinvented themselves, demonstrating a remarkable adaptability to a dramatically altered world. P.G.T. Beauregard, the dashing general, transformed into a railroad executive and urban innovator, even navigating the treacherous waters of Reconstruction-era politics with surprising pragmatism, embracing new technologies and even cooperating with black politicians. His was a life of quiet industriousness, a man who exchanged the clatter of swords for the rhythmic clatter of cable cars, his ambition finding new, often unconventional, outlets. However, the tapestry of legacy also holds darker, more disturbing threads. Nathan Bedford Forrest, a man whose military prowess was matched only by the brutality of his pre-war life as a slave trader and his post-war role as the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, represents a far more unsettling chapter. His story is a chilling reminder that the shadow of racial violence and white supremacy persisted long after the official surrender. While his later, surprising statements advocating for black rights offered a flicker of something akin to redemption, his initial legacy remains one of profound violence and a deep, unsettling darkness. The chilling whispers of fear, the quiet echoes of cruelty, are forever associated with his name. And then, there are those whose fates were sealed by the war itself. Stonewall Jackson, the deeply religious and audacious commander, met his end not by Union bullets, but by the tragic, accidental fire of his own men. His death, before the final collapse, allowed him to enter the realm of legend untainted by defeat, a perpetual symbol of Confederate heroism. Similarly, George Pickett, forever linked to the calamitous charge at Gettysburg, lived the rest of his days under the immense shadow of that single, devastating moment. His brief flight and subsequent quiet life in farming and insurance, a testament to the war's enduring psychological toll. The quiet, almost mournful, passage of their lives, cut short or forever shaped by the conflict, reminds us of the profound human cost of war. The Confederacy itself ceased to exist in 1865, its grand aspirations crumbling into dust and memory. But its leaders, the men who had guided its destiny, lived on, for years and even decades, wrestling with the immense weight of its failure. Their lives were a continuous negotiation with the past, a constant dialogue between what was and what had irrevocably become. Some found peace, others clung to pride, and some struggled with the dark echoes of their own choices. The quiet, persistent shadow of the Confederacy, its triumphs and its tragic fall, stretched long over the remainder of their lives. A silent, ever-present companion in their journey through a reunited, yet forever changed, nation. And so, the stories of these men, intertwined with the very fabric of American history, continue to whisper through the ages, inviting us to listen, to learn, and to reflect on the enduring complexities of human nature in the face of monumental change.